All right. Welcome everyone to Soft Network. Today, I'm excited as always because I get an opportunity to sit down and share another individual that I've met along the way with you all. And so today we get a chance to chat with Ryan Steadman. Is it Steadman or Steedman? I never asked.
Steadman. Thanks for asking.
Steadman. Okay, yeah, I should have asked ahead of time. Let me roll through the bio real quick and we'll get rolling. So Ryan's a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in evidence-based care for the Special Operation Forces, service members, veterans, and their families. He operates a private practice in Arlington, Virginia, providing psychotherapy and assessment for trauma, moral injury, operational stress, and complex life transitions. Dr. Steadman is also experienced operational leader with more than 2 decades of military and intelligence community service. Dr. Steadman earned his Psy.D from the University of Denver, an APA-accredited program, and completed advanced clinical training in trauma at the Department of Veteran Affairs Medical Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia. He has experience in inpatient and outpatient settings for post-traumatic stress, primary care, mental health, treatment for substance use disorders, and other trauma-informed approaches. He also serves as adjunct faculty member at the University of Denver, which I didn't know. I should have read your bio, but that's pretty cool. Teaching graduate level courses in military psychology, operational stress, and trauma treatments. Prior to entering clinical practice, he served in senior advisory and strategic planning roles across the U.S. intelligence community and as a senior psychological operations enlisted leader in the U.S. Army, including multiple combat deployments. He is deeply familiar with special operations culture, ethical complexities, and sustained high-risk environments, informing a clinically rigorous and mission-relevant approach to care. Dr. Steadman's work emphasizes confidentiality, cultural competence, and family-informed treatment, supporting long-term resilience, reintegration, and personal well-being. And outside of your practice, Ryan is an avid outdoorsman, endurance athlete, husband, father, with creative pursuits in amateur woodworking, leather craftsman, and music. If you've got that in your bio, you have to have a beard. I can't grow one, so I can't claim any of those hobbies.
It just wouldn't be authentic, right? I just need it. Yeah.
And you even got like the flannel or whatever colored shirt, not colored shirt, the design. It all works today.
I might have spent too much time in Colorado, honestly. So.
That's true. That's so funny. So, hey, man, tell us where you grew up and how you ended up in the military in the first place.
Yeah, good question. I'm excited to be here. This is a great opportunity. So I grew up in Georgia, sort of spent most of my time growing up in the South. It was very much a home for me, still family sort of scattered throughout the South now. When I was 17, I was itching to get in the military. My brother, his older brother, went to the Air Force Academy, then went into the Army. So he was sort of a big mentor for me. And by 17, I was itching for it. I started the process of joining the Army in the summer of 2001. Man, what a change happened in that process. Guys were getting ready to load out to go to Kosovo, do mostly peacetime operations, and then sort of everything changed for us. And so once 9/11 hit, I knew my whole sort of chapter after that was going to be a completely different story. So I was joined at 17. I did my final year of high school, then went off to basic training, did PSYOP training at Fort Bragg. It wasn't, but 9 months later, we were already preparing to deploy. So it was a pretty quick sort of flash to bang from that perspective. And then did my first Iraq deployment starting in 2004, and spent almost a year there. And then came home from that and had needed some dwell time, needed some downtime just after that rotation. Had some good NCOs above me that said, "Hey, once you look at getting out to language school, see if you can get a trip out to Monterey for before we spin up the next cycle." And so I was able to test out and went out and did the Arabic program out at Monterey, which I would highly recommend if anybody's listening. Great opportunity. I think the Army found out that I was, had a place on the beach out there for too long, and so right when I got back, I was back in Iraq, and this time equipped with the language, much more skilled. Had a team. It was a very different experience. So did another rotation there, basically in the same neighborhood that I was in 2004. It's quite it was quite an experience to come back and know all the streets and know all the people.
What was it like? I've never asked anybody this, but you bring up a really interesting point. So for guys that went and then came back but had learned the language, what was that like for you the second time? Obviously, same streets, same neighborhood, so a lot of familiarity, but now you've got a little bit more tools in the toolbox.
For sure. Yeah. So I had a little bit of a crash course before we left the first time. Language is a big part of the psychological operations work. And so they quickly fed us through a basic intro into Iraqi dialect and that sort of stuff. So I had some working language to go in. But when I got back, I mean, it was a matter of not needing interpreters, being able to pull folks, local leaders aside and have meetings without really it's just me in the room. It was a pretty powerful moment knowing that, I'm sitting here building trust in the local language in a way that you can't do with other people in the room. You can't do with other interpreters. They don't know who their affiliations are with or whatever. There's always some skepticism around that. And so just the having the power to be able to sort of ask everybody to leave the room and then build that relationship, it paid off significantly in the work that we did. Mind you, that time it was the surge. It was a big effort to try to build community relationships, and so that intersected for me just at the right time. I spent most of that tour in speaking in Arabic, really.
So, what made you decide to stay in, and how long did you, how long did you end up staying in?
Yeah, so I got back from that tour and did a really cool mission in East Africa for a little bit. Very different, sort of not kinetic, not combat operations. It was a very different version of psychological operations. I really enjoyed it. At that time, I had gotten I was at E7, had sort of been a little bit ahead of my skis in terms of advancing in rank and all this other stuff. I was pretty excited about it. Got news that we were going to deploy again, and actually even a follow-on rotation from that, and it started to really weigh on me. I between the two tours that I had, honestly, I wasn't processing what I was going through. I was just moving, and so a lot of folks know it's not what it's not what happens in the moment. It's what you carry down the road and years later, and then all of a sudden this starts to catch up with you. That was my experience, and so I had fortunately been able to sort of parlay my skills and my network into the intelligence community. This is my dream. And so when I got that opportunity, I finally decided to hang it up and leave the Army after 12 years. So yeah, it was tough to part, but also it kind of, I think I was ready just based on everything that I had been able to pack into.
Your transition into the intelligence community, did that keep you stateside, or were there any more deployments after that?
Not for very long, no. So being an Arabic speaker and having the sort of combat zone experience, I mean that was very sought after. This was 2012 or so, 2013, and it was that's where they needed me. That's where the country needed me. I was happy to step into that role. And for me, I was excited. This was my dream to sort of elevate to that level. And I did that for my whole intel career was about 10 years. Great experience, honestly. I don't know if I just like changing careers every 10 or 12 years, but that's what I ended up doing. It's, it's exciting and thrilling. And then I just want to change. I want to do something different. And so after I finished my time in the IC, I said, I want to be able to continue my service. It's a big value for me. I want to be able to serve. And so, this sort of always been interested in psychology and the sort of the human mind. And so this intersection of just service and mental health and everything kind of came together for me. So I applied. I said, let's just take a jump and see what happens.
So what did happen as far as, the next steps and specifically, obviously we're shooting this for individuals that are thinking about or even remotely interested in, hey, maybe I'm going to get out, or I've gotten out and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. For you, how'd you make that decision? Specifically the discipline that you chose. Walk us through that.
Yeah, it was. It certainly was a process, and that's what any chance I have to offer advice or to mentor folks going through this. Looking at a transition like this, it's picking a program that fits your needs, fits your values, fits exactly what you want out of this career. And so, University of Denver really stood out for me for a few reasons. Again, by the time I was applying, I was, really asking to go into my third career, right? So this was, I'd been in the workforce a long time, and I wasn't really in a hurry, or I wasn't eager to just sort of wait it out and take time, right? So the University of Denver program is a dual master's in Psy.D, or doctorate program, right? So that's, if you can do it in 4 years, they'll let you do it. So that appealed to me. I was ready to just knock it out as fast as I could. The University of Denver also, through the Graduate School of Professional Psychology, has a specific concentration for military psychology. Not every university is going to have that. And so when I saw that on the map, I knew I was going to get good training. I knew I was going to be able to work back into in the SOF, or at least the service member veteran community. I knew I was going to get good mentors and supervisors, folks that were going to support me through that program. So that for me was a big deal. Just knowing that I could have a place that was going to be a good fit for me. And then the last thing is, the University of Denver does have the Yellow Ribbon program, which supplements the GI Bill. Practically, it's a big deal. So the university's commitment to the veterans of the big veteran community there. I mean, that commitment alone, and being able to supplement and support financial aid was a big effect for me. So knowing that I was going to get that support on that end was also
Awesome. I want to back you up just for a second. What made you choose the clinical psych route versus, licensed marriage and family, professional counselor, social work? How did you narrow down between those different disciplines?
So I knew from the outset that I wanted to get into trauma work. I knew I wanted to sort of have the opportunity to pull from a bunch of different theoretical orientations, different ways that folks do it out there in terms of clinical work, be able to pull all that in to support whatever the best treatment solution is for whoever I was working with. And so in my mind, going for this doctorate level, going at the clinical psychology route, meant that I was going to have access to everything out there, that I could very narrowly focus to this trauma work. I wanted to do one-on-one work, and then we can get to it later, eventually evolved into group work, which I really enjoy. But I knew I wanted to focus, come back to the sort of one-on-one experience, be able to know, how inputs and outputs, how we're doing, what we need to tweak, how are things, are we meeting treatment goals, that sort of thing. That's what I really wanted to focus on with the individual. And so I knew that from the outset. And so that, for me, that sort of narrowed it. I also had good mentors who were sort of steering me in that direction, and says, let me sort of vent and say what I needed or say what I wanted. And they were able to kind of steer me in the right direction.
Now, I always get this mixed up, so you correct me if I'm wrong. Technically, there's two routes. So if you go the doctorate or the Psy.D, there's one's a clinical route and one's a research route, but you both end up being psychologists. Is that correct? Did I hit that right?
Yeah, and I won't be able to speak for the PhD side, the research side, but a lot of those, the PhD side can split off. You can have clinical psychologists, you can have folks that more focus on the research end. There's even overlap with there. Some folks will do dual hat. For a Psy.D, a doctorate in clinical psychology, it is very specific that you're in the clinical treatment setting. That is all you do. There is, obviously, we're trained on interpreting research, even supporting research and whatnot. It is just not the emphasis of the program. The emphasis is to have the toolkit and the training and the specialties to be able to apply that in the treatment setting, and even beyond that, be able to manage treatment settings, et cetera.
Okay, so do you guys get some education in that track on like administrative or like, I'll say leadership roles?
There's some, yeah. There are opportunities, and I would say I was able to get a good bit of that too during my residency within the VA, in terms of you come in and there's a team that's sort of looking for leadership expectations or whatever. You come in and so that was my experience serving kind of as a program leader, or at least just stepping into that role. But I did have some of that experience back getting through grad school as well. It's not everybody's expectation, but for me, I seem to be continuing to find it each place that I go.
Yeah. So this is the third interview I've done. It's so cool. So Max shared how he's just now about to start his program and how he actually chose, and kind of if you haven't watched Max's interview, go watch Max's interview, because I think there's some great nuggets in there. Same thing with Dylan. Dylan's about to graduate, and then Ryan, you're obviously on the other side of graduation. But when you decided to start looking at schools, were there interviews that you did? Was it strictly like, nope, I learned about DU's program, my mentor said good, so I applied? Like, take us through the practical steps and what you would also recommend for somebody that's maybe interested in a Psy.D, and things that they should ask or look for, and particularly tease out, the importance of an APA-accredited program as well.
For sure. Yeah, I'll start with right there at the end, which is having the support of an APA-accredited program, and how important that is, not just long-term as you're going through licensure once you get out, but also just applying for internships and residency programs. Like having that accreditation is it's very important. It's one level up, or it's one extra sort of token that you have in your pocket that you can use for credibility, for across the field, folks knowing that there is a standard by which these programs are operating at and regularly assessed at. So that's the other part, right? Like, my program was reevaluated a couple of years right before I started, so they had their, they were meeting all of the APA accreditation requirements that I knew of, almost day one of me starting the program. So it is a big deal. You may not always feel it on a day-to-day basis, but as I've noticed it throughout the process of applying and whatever, like I said, licensure, whatever else, it does make a difference. Mm-hmm. So look for those APA accredited programs. If your heart's set on one that's not, don't be afraid of it. Go for it. I don't know that it'll necessarily hold you back, but it is something that you might have to be mindful of in terms of where your career goes and whatnot. In terms of interviews, I had pretty much narrowed it down to the University of Denver. I really wanted the program. We also, that's the other thing. I have a family. It was important for us to factor in really the places we were willing to move and to live. And, this was, when I started the program, it was in the middle of the global pandemic. And so there was a lot of factors that were also driving kind of how we made our choices. And so, I will say I'm very thankful that my first choice worked out, but also, I had very intentionally decided on that program. And through interview processes, I did interview with the program manager of their psychology track. I made sure to talk with students who had also either been in the program or who were going through the program, just to get sort of the ground truth on what it was like, what I should expect going in. So yeah, I would highly recommend to do your due diligence, and if you sort of at the outset understand what it is that you want, and is that aligning also with your values, like, lean into it, make sure that those are lining up with what you need, because this wasn't my experience, but being in a program that isn't a good fit or doesn't line up with what you need can be a pretty frustrating experience.
Absolutely. I think you brought up a great point. And I talk about it with my students all the time, of like the parallel process sometimes in life, counselor education to the clinical work. And it parlays beautifully into the military, in that we kind of have to start with the end, right? What's the operational goal, or what's the goal in mind, whether it's in therapy, whether it's in school, whatever, or what's your goal, and then work backwards. And to your point about the APA, take this for what it is, individuals that are listening, the accreditations over the different disciplines. So for clinical psychs and psychology in general, APA is kind of the gold standard. They're the ones that When you apply for a state license and you do other things, it's going to be almost seamless if you have that accreditation versus, and if you're not, you're going to be able to get licensed, but maybe you have to knock at the door as opposed to having the key. There's going to be a few extra steps in that process. Same thing goes for counseling. KCREP is the gold standard. Look for a KCREP accredited program. If you're absolutely devoted to something that's not KCREP accredited, just like Ryan said, hey, go to it. Just know that there's going to be a few extra steps on the back end. Same thing with social work. Same thing with MFTs. That's marriage and family therapists, for those that don't know. But making sure you're looking at those accreditations along with your goals, I think, is extremely important. And it's okay if you don't know. I'll ask Ryan, did you know you're going to end up in private practice? Was that the goal from the beginning?
It was my goal. I was willing to be open-minded to what was going to come up along the way. But I have learned over the years that I do enjoy sort of independently operating outside of systems, like being my own boss, running my own policies, setting my own standards. So, that was my goal. But if, for example, I did my residency in the VA, if the VA was going to just, knock my socks off and I was not going to ever leave, then, I was willing I was open to that experience. But yeah, I'm very fortunate to say this is exactly where I want.
That's awesome. For anybody that's coming in, again, is there anything looking back that you didn't like about the track that you took that you may at least throw out there of like, hey, I really didn't consider this, or I didn't know, because you don't know what you don't know, and this is something that you're going to have to deal with? Was there any hiccups along the way that you at least want somebody coming behind you to know about?
Yeah, I've thought about this question quite a bit. The one thing I keep coming back to is that, for better or worse, and it's just the reality is that if you follow whatever track you follow, but specifically in reference to mine, because that's my experience, it's a big lift. Like it is not it's not an easy process, and I wish it were a little easier for folks. I wish it weren't such a tall task to be expecting to do clinical unpaid clinical hours for multiple years on end, to be doing studying throughout the day, classes all day long, clinical work in the evenings. It's a huge lift, and not to say you should shy away from it, but I do think that there are some areas we could make it a little less demanding or a little less of a tall task, especially around like I said, just those sort of unpaid experiences that a lot of folks have. So that is one area I think I would come back to. It's like, I didn't necessarily like how hard it is. Like, we want folks to be able to come to these programs, jump in, learn, get the experience, get out there, start helping folks. I mean, the demand is too large at this point, whether it's in the veteran and service member community, or whether it's outside in our larger society. Like, we can't have this much of a mountain in front of folks who are trying to get into mental.
Yeah. I've actually heard a lot of individuals pivot from, initially they're like, hey, I worked with a psych, at a command, really liked, everything they did, helped out. But then once they looked at, all right, here are the steps and the time also to invest in becoming a clinical psychologist, a lot of them, and again, anecdotal, just my feedback, a lot of them have said, you know what, I'm going to pivot, life stage, whatever, I'm going to go social work, I'm going to go MFT or licensed counselor. And a lot of those programs, obviously some of them pre-COVID, but a lot of them have set up, accredited tracks online where obviously you can still be living wherever you want. I wanted to ask, because I don't know, I just don't know enough programs because it's not my discipline, but are there any that you know of on the clinical psych end of the stick that are online, or the vast majority I would assume are brick and mortar?
I think the vast majority are going to be brick and mortar. I think you have to have the clinical hours and the clinical experience in addition to your academic time. So I don't know of any at the top of my head, but I haven't necessarily searched for it. But I don't know how you could have that experience without having some central brick and mortar that you have to operate out of, whether it's a clinic, whether it's a classroom.
Yeah. So I'm always interested. So social work typically, and again, this is a general, it may be different for certain social work programs you look at, but they get thrown in the deep end pretty quick. So they start seeing clients, I think it's year 2. I know the counseling track, it's always the very end of the program. So you've got practicum, internship 1 and 2, where they've got to either go to a site on campus, or if they're remote, then they have to set up a site where they're working at a counseling center, hospital, jail, etc., where they're getting clinical hours, and they got a site supervisor. For the clinical psych track that you went through, what was the process, and when did you actually start working with real clients?
So this is one thing I didn't know about before I started the program, and maybe it's a good selling point. I started working in the therapy treatment room the second week of the program.
Wow.
Yeah. So they have no problem, and hopefully this I should record this now, and then we'll forever live on the internet. But hopefully they keep this going. But so they have no problem throwing folks in, and for good reason. One is that there's a lot of research just around common factors and support for therapy within a certain symptom severity, obviously within a certain set of diagnoses, right? But just starting therapy, being with somebody, processing under good supervision, there's a lot of work that can be done with that, and they prove that you don't always have to have 2, 3, 4 years of classroom training before you actually can start seeing clients. So the other thing is that it reduces wait list times. So we have folks that were waiting, some weeks, sometimes months to get in to see a therapist. If I've got a first year student who can actually do some good just by sitting down and getting good supervision and experiencing therapy, let's get it done. And so that, I applaud them for making that decision and having that policy. So that was good for me and for a lot of the cohort members I was with, because not only were we getting experience, we were turning right around from the classroom, putting it right into the treatment room, and then having that cycle, which was experientially great. But beyond that, when it came time third year to be applying for residency and whatever else, we had hours, we had experience that we could be competitive against, and you're competing against applicants across the country for a limited number of sites. So we had more hours and more experience coming into those than some of the other programs, because I know a lot of folks who started a year in, or a year and a half in, or something. We were already doing it. And actually, that first year I was working out of the 2 clinics. So you sort of, when I say you throw you in, like you're working in multiple clinics, seeing patients and doing the work. So it's a really cool feature of that.
Now, are you guys, walk me through, and obviously your experience, but you guys are seeing clients early on. Are you guys paired with a VA in the city, or is it a clinic on campus and you're seeing students? And then how long are you seeing? Because I know I want to say social work again. I'd have to go back to Dylan's interview. I think they do a certain amount, then stop, and then come back. Is it, week 2 you start and you don't ever stop really until you graduate from seeing clients? How does that work out?
Yeah, so it's sort of a stair step. That first year, you're in the university, in the clinic that's housed out of the program. So you're always have a requirement to see clients out of that clinic, and then you're also required to have an externship. So you're working at a private practice, or a state facility, or whatever opportunity that you got. There is a pretty large consortium of opportunities, of extern opportunities around the Denver area for the University of Denver program. So you can take your pick of any of the options. But so you were working out of the clinic and working at an externship. You did that for the first year. So we were sort of locked into those positions for a year, and then it rotated again. So new externship the second year.
Gotcha.
If you wanted, you could take 2. You could do 2 externships. If you wanted to squeeze the experience even more, you could double up in different clinics. So it's you're pretty much locked in year after year.
That's cool though. It reminds me almost of med school for individuals that get exposed to different disciplines within medicine, and then they eventually choose. And of course, there's the matching. But yeah, it's something me and Dylan were talking about, is getting as much exposure as general as possible. I equated it back to high school. There's like 10% of the kids that come out of high school and they're like, I want to be a doctor, and go be a doctor. The rest of the people kind of flounder, figure out what they want to do in life, and then go do it. From what I've seen with young clinicians, is there's like a small percentage that know exactly the population they want to work with and start to focus and specialize, which has its benefits and its shortcomings. Whereas clinicians that maybe have an idea but go and get that general education across the board, I feel like they have a much stronger foundation upon graduation or getting their independent license than the individual that just narrowly focuses. So that's cool that you guys get bounced around and get all those opportunities. I'm sure that just enriches your guys' education.
For sure. And that was the same in the VA residency that I was in. So we were, you were doing inpatient PTSD or residential PTSD. You were doing primary care mental health, which is a very different model. You were an outpatient. You could do any number of specialties, but they're basically throwing you in so that you can sort through what exactly that you might need or want to do. So that continued all the way up till I finished the program. So I appreciated that.
That's cool. Obviously, well, not obviously, you didn't actually go through the pipeline. You applied as a provider, and one of the great providers we have. But I wanted to ask you, for you, obviously there's you're a veteran. There's a lot swirling around, post-traumatic stress, etc., but also moral injury. And so it's a really important topic. I wanted to ask you, like, give us the snapshot, 30,000 foot view, but then if you want to mine down as well, like, what is moral injury and why is this so important?
Yeah, so this is a great question, right? So I didn't know about moral injury before I came to the program, and so through my network, through my supervisors, I started drawing my attention to this. It is so. In a nutshell, I like to think of moral injury. I like to start with what it looks like. So, for example, normally what you'll see is like a profound sense of guilt or shame, disgust or betrayal. They're very, very deep emotions. And usually where that comes from is that somebody has acted in a way that has gone against most of their values or their morals. So it's a very psychologically and emotionally painful experience. This idea of you think you know who you are, and you, especially in the military, where you have this sort of strong sense of identity, strong sense of team, of mission. It's a very values-based experience and organization. There are circumstances that can completely rupture that. You think you're so confident in this experience, and then all of a sudden, you can't identify either yourself or your team or anybody else afterwards because of what happened. And what that looks like is, it could be a betrayal. Team member that's gone and done something that was against the team cohesion or against the team ethos. You're like, what? This guy would never have done this. I can't believe this happened. But it also could be something like, I've seen it. I've worked with like pilots, so like fighter pilots, unmanned aerial system, like drone pilots, when ordnance doesn't go where it's supposed to go, and all of a sudden you come face to face with this reality that you've just been a part of something that you never imagined would happen, and all you're left with is this sense of guilt. All you're left with is this inability to make sense of the world after that effect. It's a very deep experience. Most of the folks I've known and have worked with carry these burdens for a very long time. So shame is a big component of it. And when that's involved, of course, you're not going to tell anybody, you're not going to share it with anybody. And then you sort of mix that with this sense of like, we're supposed to do hard things. Like, big part of military identity is to carry hard things, to do hard things, and to like endure. And moral injury doesn't work that way. It doesn't go away. So It's a really unique component. It falls in many places under the category of trauma, but it's very different. It can have a spiritual sense if you've sort of transgressed your sense and your commitment to your faith by what you did or what you witnessed. It's a very like I said, it's a very deep emotional experience that folks go through. A lot of people don't know what they've had the experience, but not had the words to put towards it. And I experienced this thing. I've been living my whole life with it. It's a massive secret. I keep it in private. I had no idea that I could call it this. I didn't know idea we can call it moral injury. So it is, like I said, it's a very complex space. Again, a lot of folks don't know that there's good treatment out there. There's good research behind it. That's kind of that's become a passion of mine.
That's awesome. Total kind of pivot, but I'm just one provider to another provider. Post-traumatic stress, there's I'll say a debate. It's not really a debate, but you have some people that will strictly only use, hey, it's post-traumatic stress. I'm not going to put the disorder on there. And then other people are like, it's post-traumatic injury, right? And I know we're getting the weeds in here a little bit, but obviously we're clinicians and I don't know, we live in the weeds a lot of times, but also we're thinking in the weeds. I'm just curious, from your perspective, should it be post-traumatic stress disorder? And if so, why? If not, I'd love to hear your feedback, and I'll offer mine if you're interested, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I hear this too. I mean, I can't go to a conference or meet with other colleagues without really it's coming up at some point. And so I think that, what I feel like more often fits is this idea of post-traumatic stress or operational stress. And you mentioned I had a chance to teach, adjunct teach at the university this past winter, focused on what happens to us psychologically and physically when we go through very difficult, austere environments, when we experience combat, to include like what life is like for the Artemis team, spending 9 days in a capsule, right? Like it changes who you are, and it is stressful. These environments are incredibly stressful. So I oftentimes find folks are just connecting with the idea of operational stress or just sort of some continuum of the stress or some continuum of stress. But like we can't not live in a world where we call it a disorder because we live in a world with insurance. We live in a world with systems that recognize that as a diagnosis, the VA or whatever else. And how you feel about that is important, right? I don't know that we can ever do away with that. But if it comes time to labeling and understanding a situation, I think either stress or an injury is oftentimes what I hear is like, that's something that is it's an easy metaphor, right? Injuries can close, they can reopen, you can compensate for an injury, it can cause cascading issues throughout. It's very sort of understandable. Everybody's had an injury of some sort. So I feel like that is more often a lot of folks I work with say like, yeah, this does feel like an injury of something, whether we can define that or not.
Yeah.
Just my thoughts.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it.
What do you think, Chris?
I'm like you, in the sense that, with insurance, and I'm looking at 2 DSMs right here. Those are diagnostic and statistical manuals of mental disorders. It's kind of like our Bible, in the clinical mental health field. I don't think you can ever get rid of it, but, I also think it's important that we have definitions and we have assessments and certain criteria, but more importantly for those that are the diehards, like it's just stress or it's just injury. I want to educate and let them know. Generally the pushback is like, I don't want that label. And, I agree. Like, I don't want people to self-identify with like the worst parts of themselves. But I also want them to understand, and you hit the nail on the head, like it's a continuum, it's a spectrum, meaning the vast majority of disorders, I had a bad day today, so like I'm not feeling great. Well, I'm not really interested in pleasurable activities. Well, that's one criteria of major depressive disorder. If I keep going, at some point, I'm going to reach the threshold and the criteria to be diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And maybe I live on that end of the spectrum for a little bit, but maybe I do treatment, or maybe I just, stop eating Doritos and get off the couch and run, and then I slide back down. The vast majority of disorders, actually I can't say because I don't know actually the ratio, but a tremendous amount of disorders in particular, like generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress specifically, you can come on and reach that criteria and then you can slide off. Unlike schizophrenia, bipolar, autism, even though autism in and of itself, there's a spectrum, but like once you're on it, you're on it. And so that's my big thing is like, hey, we need it for criteria. But at the end of the day, it's one that if you do therapy and you really attack it, you can literally not be diagnosed to a point. And I think that's missed. Yeah. So weird rabbit trail, but I was curious to your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great point too, because a lot of folks don't know that, right? That's a very important point that I always like to remind the folks that are coming in for what they might label as PTSD treatment, or they may have a diagnosis of that. Right? PTSD is a recoverable disorder. And there are folks that come in through our doors that don't have recoverable disorders, right? So there, as you pointed out, right? So like, it's important to understand diagnostically what is here, not only because we can have some probability of hopeful success with treatment, but also we have enough research to show that very targeted, very specific treatment can be effective for that set of conditions. So we want to be able to get that right. So I was trying to say, like, if it's PTSD, I mean, I understand how that might be uncomfortable, or you might not want that label, but it is important so that we can do the right procedure. The same conversation would happen with your medical. And to come back to moral injury, right? Like, PTSD is a condition of fear. It's a fear-based experience, whereas moral injury is about meaning. It's about like, how did I make sense of this thing that I thought was so stable? So just understanding the differences there drastically changes how we're going to approach our treatment trajectory. Not to say good PTSD treatment can't help moral injury and vice versa, but it's not one for one. And as clinicians, we need to be able to recognize that at the outset.
I think a part of it's generational too. So both my grandfathers were in World War II, and then my dad's cousin was in Vietnam. And so you had individuals that we grew up with that quite literally had it the rest of their lives. And we didn't have a diagnosis for it. We really didn't understand it. I mean, some would argue with Chris's operator syndrome, we still don't fully understand it, which I would agree to a certain extent. But what I can say is this is the first generation where we have the knowledge, we understand you can slide on, you can slide off. And I think we're going to have less and less, hopefully, veterans that are just, oh, that guy, he was in the war, like some of the people that we grew up with that maybe we stayed away from that guy's house because he's a veteran and it had this negative connotation that he's crazy or, he's unstable, which may have been for sure unfair, but to a certain extent concerning the idea of post-traumatic stress or shell shock, it was something to be considered lifelong. Whereas no, you can be healed. Like, you can literally get to a point where you're undiagnosable. Now, every trauma is different. We're speaking in generalities to a certain extent. So,
sure. I want to say one more thing about that. And just because we're on the topic is that I think an important thing to remember here is that if you study warrior tribes throughout history, obviously they weren't using the term PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. They weren't using shell shock. They weren't even using what moral injury used to be called, which is an injury of the soul. They were using some variants of that. But I think a lot of this also comes down to how we treat our warrior culture, right? And how we reintegrate those veterans back into the communities, how our society shares the burden of what was done, right? So if we look at some of the Native experiences and rituals and things like that, a lot of that was about reintegration. A lot of that was about how we go through certain ceremonies and certain rituals to make sure that everybody's involved, but also that there is some sort of, for lack of a better term, like a purification process. That person that can be welcomed back into the tribe. I think we're missing a big part of that. And I think that we can argue PTSD, we can argue all these things, but also there's another layer here where I think we as as a society can do an even better job of kind of carrying the larger burden of what's gone on, especially over the past 25 years, but even beyond that. We have Vietnam veterans who are saying the same thing of still wanting society to be involved more, to listen to the stories, to sit with the pain that some of those veterans experienced. So just I felt like that was appropriate to plug while we were on it.
No, 100%. I echo that. And, Andy Stumpf has got a popular podcast, if you're familiar with it, and this was, 7-8 years ago, he made that same comment. He was like, I think we would be better off, and he was specifically talking about the special operations community. He goes, I think we would be better off if we could somehow capture it's so hard to get in, and it should be almost equally that hard to get out. And he goes, I think in that process, you would probably have a lot of things kind of worked out in the wash. Obviously, that's a 30,000 foot view, but I couldn't agree more. And to your point, our Western society and the separation that we have as individuals, yes, collectively, whether you believe we're made in the image of a triune God or pack animals, and I'm not here to debate philosophy. The point is, the research says we're made to connect, and both of those say we're made to connect. And when you take human beings, and speaking of the pandemic, and you disconnect them during difficult or right after difficult things, yeah, there's a lot of bad things that happen psychologically, relationally, physically as a result of that disconnection. And when you have groups of people, specifically warriors, that come back and are very isolated and detached for lack of reintegration, you're going to have a cascading variables that happen within their sphere. And, it's a huge problem that we have for sure in America. I would argue that the Eastern approaches to how they reintegrate are much stronger based on that collective culture versus our individualistic culture. We're, starting at a deficit for sure.
Well said.
Okay. On that note, what do you think, as we start to wrap up, what do you think some of the biggest struggles are for individuals, specifically veterans, when it comes to treatment, whether it's post-traumatic stress, or, it could be depression, whatever, like, how can we better help veterans? And then for veterans that maybe watch this and, they're just, this came up in their feed because we're talking about veterans, like, what would you say to some of those individuals that may be struggling out there?
Yeah, this is so important right now. So I think there are lots of reasons why folks either don't reach out or are hesitant to reach out. Obviously, a big part of this is stigma. I think that if people don't feel understood and not comfortable going in to talk with somebody, they're not going to engage in some of the hardest parts of what they experienced. And so there is a concern that if you're not a veteran, if you haven't worked in the field, if you don't have good training in soft culture or veteran culture, like it's just never going to land. It's never going to be a good fit. And while I don't think you have to be a veteran provider to be able to make those connections. I do think it helps tremendously to reduce that stigma. But I do think there's a big concern that it's just not going to be, the space isn't going to be a good fit to work on this deeply private experience that a lot of folks have. And so it continues to fester, it continues to boil over. I think beyond that, it's embedded in a lot of our culture. It is just to continue on, keep calm and drive on. And I think that there is an assumption that you can carry some of these burdens for the rest of your life until they finally go away. It's a very dispiriting moment when you realize that they don't go away, that they're still there. Prefer not to wait till things boil over, but I do think there's an endurance aspect to a lot of, especially soft community, that I can endure this. I can just keep going no matter what. And then a very realistic factor here, and this is speaking a lot to the service members and intelligence community members and whatever else. You get security clearances, you've got chain of command, you got all kinds of potential sources that could separate you from the team, that could pull your access, et cetera. I think there are pretty widespread assumptions that if I disclose, or if I see a mental health provider, then it could be detrimental to my career. It could result in early separation, those sorts of things. So I spend a lot of my time trying to advocate to bring that stigma down, and recognize, I work in a private practice. The four walls of my practice are where our conversation goes. It's a very important part of what we do, because if you don't have that confidentiality and that privacy, you don't know what could happen. You think about the consequences. You ruminate about what could happen if this were to get out. So I do think those are some very realistic factors of why some folks are just not coming in, or maybe why they're hesitating, saying, I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later. Yeah.
One more thing that I was thinking of as you just mentioned that, I think for individuals that are veterans, I think, I think in variables, just because of the research nature of my degree, like I think the set of variables are drastically different for the greatest generation, the Korean, the Vietnam War veterans, and then the GWAT veterans. And these are just a couple, but thinking through them really quickly, when my grandfathers came home, the entire block was filled with veterans, right? So there was the opportunity to talk, connect, and then you had an entire nation, for the most part, that women were working in factories. Like even they had a part in this, unified process of supporting the war. And so there was much more of a collective mindset. But then you fast forward into the Vietnam War, and even the Korean War, and there's a little bit less collective community involvement. And then, of course, we know about the Vietnam War and the protests, and then that fractured that. Well, let's then take these stupid things that we know are actively working against you through great documentaries and research that have been coming out. And so you're more isolated than ever by the sheer nature of technology. The community itself hasn't been involved in the GWAT era war. If you come from a special operations background, you're even more uniquely isolated. And then this thing is feeding you negativity quite literally by the hour, by the minute. And you think, it makes sense. You look at your grandparents or your uncle or whoever that were in those wars, and they're like, well, they dealt with it. Yeah, but the variables are drastically different. And I would argue that the table is set against you. And one of, multiple variables that may be why the amplification of veteran suicide is so high, specifically in this generation compared to previous generations. Just some of the stuff my brain rolls through as I get an opportunity to throw around ideas with somebody else that's been living it, but also thinking through it. So I appreciate it. Anything you want to add, Ryan? Anything that we didn't get to that you may want to pass back to, a young individual? I say young, but somebody that's, going into a second career and looking at clinical mental health. Anything else?
Yeah. I mean, first off, I'm obviously a big advocate for changing things up and searching for new meaning and new senses of identity. And so I would encourage folks to be curious and lean into, if you're feeling passionate about this work, if service is a value for you that you don't feel like you're tapping into or whatever, lean into that and see where it takes you. It's been incredibly rewarding for me. And that hypothesis is just carried out over and over and over again for me, that this is the right direction for me. And so I would just say, like, for folks out there, just think about your values, continue to focus on that, and see where it goes. And for folks that are getting into programs, applying for programs, especially if you're a veteran, I would say just, put your seatbelt on and get ready to learn a lot about yourself in the process of learning everything out there is to know about psychology or social work or whatever you're getting your program in, because it's not just a one-way street. And in fact, for me, my experience, like just learning about military psychology and being around that in my program, like it's not just the skills that I teach, but it's also just processing my own experiences and sitting with other veterans, right? Like you don't do that work without something coming. You can't just leave it at the door. So I would encourage folks, if you come across that or you're anticipating that, dive into it. It's a really cool experience. It strengthens the therapeutic alliance. It strengthens you as an individual. And if it's not doing that, definitely tell a mentor or supervisor. But I think it's an amazing experience that you get to go through a psychology program and you get to kind of explore internally as well as everything that's going around you. Just lean into it. That's what I would suggest.
Absolutely. One of my grad school professors used to say, so much of life is us leaning away from the things that we should be leaning into. And another noted, and I think it's played true in the last decade that I've been a clinician, but she said that individuals that stop working on themselves who are becoming clinicians, you will plateau, if not digress. Whereas the clinicians that continue to peel back their own layers, you are the ones that are going to continue to evolve and grow as a clinician. And I couldn't recommend that enough. So even if you're not at a point like Ryan is saying, where you're ready to pull the trigger on a program, jump in, find somebody to meet with and start peeling back the layers, or do the light work and start diving into books that are peeling back the layers. Sometimes books are a really soft entry to therapy where you can learn some of the concepts, some of the language, get exposed to great clinicians that obviously have written books, and allow their work to start working on you before you actually sit down and schedule an appointment with anyone.
Absolutely. If it's uncomfortable, you're probably doing it right.
Yeah, you're probably in the right spot. That's right. Yeah. All right, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. Man, I feel like I could spend a couple hours chewing your ear on different things, but I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you, sharing a little bit about your journey and how you got into the clinical psych realm. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Chris. Thanks for having me. And we'll look forward to the rest of the podcast series.